Hola. Time for another reading, I think, because we're getting to the end of the synthesized tarot course. I think we're about 18 months into it, and we are currently approaching the end of session 10 of 11, which is the 10th Arcanum, the Wheel, paired with the 20th, which is Judgment, which seems strangely appropriate at this momentous point in history. Okay, well, I'm not going to turn my email off, even though it keeps making noises, because on my old computer it's hard to turn back on, so apologies for any beeps. Now then, I've shared with members of the group, I think it was either the Moibus or the Shmakov text, but not Nina Roudnikova's Judgment. So I thought that would be the subject of the reading to help, complete the synthetic circle. Go clockwise, shall we? This is the contemporary Moibus deck. That's the wheel of that deck with its various attributes, including the Hebrew letter Yod. And this is the 20th, which is, can you see that? Which is associated with the Hebrew letter Resh. Okay, so this is going to be from the Solar Way. The symbolic picture of the Arcanum depicts a grave with a fallen tombstone. A man, a woman, and a child rise from this grave. Their heads are raised up as they look into the sky at the trumpeting angel. Let us pay attention to the astrological correspondence of the last four arcana. The zodiac constellation of Pisces, the 19th arcanum, refers to the development of the subjective principle, to the withdrawal into oneself and overcoming the interface with the objective world and the extreme obstacles in that. The 20th arcanum corresponds to Saturn, the 22nd to the Sun, the 21st or 0 to Orion. The correspondence between Saturn and the Sun is especially interesting. Saturn is the sphere of the extreme hierarchy of solar influence, that is, as it were, the outer shell of our system. The Sun is both its centre and the doors to space and eternity. After leaving the earthly world, consciousness will not come into direct contact with the Sun. It should still undergo a number of changes, starting with the influence of Saturn, and gradually adapt to the influences in their pure rather than reflected form, which will make the consciousness able to reach the 22nd principle, that is, under the direct influence of the Sun, but without the danger of burning in its rays, the 22nd being the world. The entrance to the sphere of influence of Saturn is marked by a meeting with the so-called guardian of the threshold. This meeting takes place after the suspension point of the 19th arcanum is found, but before the entry of consciousness into the reality of the spiritual world. Finding this point of suspension, therefore, can be characterized as such an instant illumination of the entire consciousness, after which there remains confidence in the reality of the spiritual world and the consciousness of one's belonging to it. The degree of accommodation of the received spiritual ray depends on the creative work done on one's earthly personality, on the purity and transparency of the conductors, and the degree of self-control acquired, also the fortress of the created spiritual connection. Without preliminary subjective work, therefore, it is premature to break into the spiritual world, and a meeting with the guardian of the threshold, inevitably following a spiritual insight, is dangerous for the consciousness whose conductors are not purified, because this may threaten a new break in the newly established connection and throw the consciousness far back. Thus, the creation of a new spiritual connection with the higher world will be more difficult for the practitioner. The meeting with the guardian of the threshold is known to all initiatory schools and the leaders who prepare students for this moment. The upbringing of the personality and the establishment of the volitional axis in it put special emphasis on the development of the pentagram of the mental body. The guardian of the threshold is the totality of all the incarnational karma accumulated by the initiate, which is synthesized at the moment of his exit from the waters of the earth into a personified being. In the guardian of the threshold, it meets with itself, or rather, with the synthesis of all its earthly personalities formed in the chain of its incarnations and merged into one entity. If the initiate has not subjected his personality to the process of purification and transformation, or has not completed this process, then karma with an inexorable sequence draws him back to those cliches that require transformation. And since he meets with his objectified personality at the moment of the karmic demand, the consciousness is, as it were, reabsorbed by the karmic flow in the most negative parts of the ego and becomes what is called in the initiatory schools a defeated guardian of the threshold. If the main karmic lines are transformed by the purification of the vehicles, that is, the spirituality of the mental body, the enlightenment of the astral body, and the discipline of the etheric body, then the meeting with the guardian of the threshold is reduced to a revision of all past incarnations. And this gives us an inkling of the connection between the 10th Arcanum, the wheel, you go round and round wheel until everything has been sublimated and purified and you're ready for the 20th and the meeting with the guardian. During this revision, the need for some corrections and alterations in the composition of its conductors comes to consciousness, and this work temporarily binds it to the earth, along with great efforts to replace it in its own incarnation of planar reflections with the real planar radiations as part of its earthly bodies. This calm revision testifies to the victory over the guardian of the threshold, that is, above the complete non-identification of consciousness with its earthly personality and its karma. Thus, from Saturn, consciousness gets its mastery over karma. After this victory, consciousness passes psychically through the spheres of subsequent planetary influences, acquiring from Jupiter a special invincible cheerfulness. From Mars, a special intensity of experience that is not characteristic of earthly people. From the Moon, a small manas and the vibrations of motherhood and guardianship. From Venus, the ability of ideation. From Mercury, the general plasticity of the soul without loss in the adaptations of its spiritual person. And finally, when he comes into contact with the Sun, the spiritual core flashes up in him, that is, a full awareness of his divine origin and unity with God. This voice of the spiritual core, the voice of silence, or the voice that sounds in the desert, is precisely the divine attraction, the first subtitle of the 20th principle, the desire for spiritual help received from the redemptive cliche. This voice, drowned out by the agitations of the conductors of the earthly personality, now sounds in the consciousness like the trumpet of an archangel, no longer allowing him to attach itself to the states through which he passes in the planetary circles. This is the voice of eternity. Only after leaving the sphere of influence of the earth can consciousness survive this voice of eternity as an irrefutable reality, and then his whole worldview turns upside down. Then his initiation into the spiritual world begins. The values of this world cease to be abstractions, and their reality is perceived with 1,000 times greater persuasiveness and intensity than material realities were once perceived. When instead of a point of spiritual suspension, all cognitive and creative possibilities were based on a material point of support. Everything that is lived in the world of the earth seems to be a dream. Immersion in the earthly conditions of the continuing incarnation of such a consciousness is ghostly, and through these ghosts, it sees the manifestation of spiritual rays. The paths of earthly searches and dreams are ahead of him with mathematical clarity. The illusions of earthly life cannot capture him, and his task is to restore values in their original purity in the condition of earthly existence. Among these illusions created by the play of countless refractions and reflections of spiritual truths in the energy flows of the earth. For this work, he needs to start for himself a new cycle of existences on earth in new vehicles. He creates a new, truly astral, that is, stellar body for his earthly manifestations, replacing the earthly mental body with the mind, the three rays of the higher manas, in which knowledge and creativity merge into one. His astral body, created from pure planetary vibrations, which include distant cosmic vibrations, is only a shining veil of an immortal soul, the shining centre of which is the sun. Of course, such a transformation also transforms the etheric body. Merging it with the astral body and the physical body becomes what is symbolized by the words, the temple of God. As a result, it is the only one belonging to the earth in the organization of the initiate's guides. This is symbolized by the subtitle, Astral Rebirth, and the picture of the family coming out of the coffin as a new cycle of existence, according to the 336 symbolism. The application of the law of dynamics is depicted by the family. The consciousness of eternity is the perception of the divine essence with all the potential of possibilities. The consciousness of eternity is the restoration in one's own consciousness of connection with the Absolute through the divine centre of consciousness. In the earthly life, the consciousness of eternity can be achieved only in the state of samadhi, characterized by the inaction of all vehicles, including buddhi, because every action is a flow of changes which is incompatible with eternity. Therefore, the ideal of non-doing in all spiritual schools is considered the highest, but it cannot be understood as a constant doing nothing. The ideal of non-doing is the complete detachment of consciousness from any state, and it is clothed in shells only in the case of manifestation. These shells are perceived as something to the consciousness of an outsider by their nature, and the investment in them is associated with the concept of sacrifice. The natural state of consciousness is immersion in eternity, in the Absolute. It is life in the ever-present, before which time is an illusion. The past and the future exist only when consciousness puts on shells, and they are needed by it only to carry out actions for the sake of helping the environment. As long as the world exists, that is, as long as there are consciousnesses identified with the shells, there are actions, there is time. For the creation of the initiate, time is the unfolding of eternity, so time is infinite. Infinity is an expanded eternity. Time is not an abstract concept, but a real flow of changes that unfolds into the infinity of possibilities, the potential of the Absolute. There is no present in time, because the moment of transition from the past to the future is elusive and indefinable for a consciousness immersed in the flow of time. The present exists only where the flow of time stops with its flow from the past to the future, where the eternal comes into its own. Every time we have spiritual insights of consciousness, we catch this moment standing, that is, eternal, and time then unfolds the captured spiritual ray into a series of experiences, actions, and changes that occur under the influence of the perception of this spiritual ray. We get a glimpse of this in lucid dreams and in astral experiences generally. An unfoldment of events and experiences and scenes. Rare is the person who has not had at least one eternal moment in his or her life, that is, an instantaneous insight, even if the reason for this was some kind of external push. This eternal moment changed the direction of their way of thinking, their emotional life, their manifested actions, and, in this changed flow, their life unfolded in events and facts, the eternal value that had entered their consciousness. Noisy dog. The relation of eternity and infinity is the relation of basis and function, and in the human psyche these two principles determine two spiritual and psychological types, mysticism and spiritual esotericism. These two types can be determined only after leaving the sphere of influence of the earth. The type of mystic strives for eternity, for the direct immersion of consciousness in the absolute. His natural state is non-doing, and every act is associated with an element of spiritual suffering. The type of spiritual esotericist knows about the anchoring of his consciousness in the absolute and can at any time bring it into a state of samadhi, that is, immerse his vehicles in inaction, going into the eternal. But at the same time, he or she joyfully accepts infinity, and putting on shells is not associated with the element of suffering, but with creative joy, the creation of new opportunities in the flow of time, reflecting eternal values. The esoteric goes to the eternal through the infinite, to God through the universe, while the mystic wants to pass through the universe, immersing himself in God. The path of achieving the state of a perfect person, which involves merging with infinity and the beginning of eternity, is impossible without deep inner work, liberation from one's own shortcomings and negative qualities, and this in turn requires efforts aimed at self-knowledge. Without awareness of one's own advantages and disadvantages, it is impossible to approach perfection. Self-knowledge involves self-observation and self-study. To an unenlightened and spiritually undeveloped person, it may seem that he only does what he observes himself and knows himself in the process of life. However, everyday self-observation and self-study is significantly different from the process of genuine spiritual and esoteric self-knowledge. If a person begins to observe himself seriously, then from a certain moment he comes to the conclusion that he does not know himself enough, especially if he begins to observe himself from a spiritual point of view. The oppressive feeling described here is already the beginning of true knowledge. The painfulness of such a feeling when knowing oneself is inherent in the very nature of the human soul emphasizes how strong the desire to consider oneself is in a full-fledged and true person. No matter how ugly a person looks, he or she must have the courage to soberly look at this own ugliness. Until now, man has not perceived his inner ugliness for the reason that he has not yet sufficiently immersed his consciousness in his own essence. It is only in such moments of complete honesty to oneself that a person begins to understand the full power of his self-love in all its inflated magnitude. At the same time, he is amazed at how little desire there is in him to throw off this self-love. It's like there's yourself and your shadow in one being, isn't it? Yourself and your double. And imagine what that shadow self, that shadow double would look like if it was kind of removed from your person and set out on its own. How would it appear? All these spiritual qualities are especially noticeable in a person's relationships with other people. With true self-knowledge, a person suddenly learns, for example, that his goodwill to a friend in the unexplored depths of the subconscious has the appearance of envy or even open hatred. When trying to cope with these negative feelings, they break out of the subconscious with a downright spontaneous force and manifest themselves in his external relations. There are many more examples of such an external disguise of a person's hidden subconscious feelings, when he himself is sincerely confident in his goodwill and conscientiousness. Such an in-depth kind of self-knowledge occurs when observing oneself outside the physical body, when no self-justifications are able to obscure the true images of the spiritual world. This kind of self-knowledge has a depressing effect on the soul at first, but no soul who wants to get closer to the spiritual world can avoid it, because it inevitably arises due to the special relations that a person enters into before his soul. He observes himself from a completely different point of view and comes to the conviction that such as he is not acceptable for the light world, and that there is something in him that must be thrown off in order to get the right to consciously cross the threshold of the spiritual world. Difficulties in fulfilling these requirements can cause different reactions in a person, or he will begin to criticize spiritual truths that make it difficult for him to enter the invisible world and explain them with empty fantasies, hiding behind this criticism a subconscious fear of truths, that is, the habit of living in what is perceived by the sense and the mind. This is a special universal form of self-love, seeking justification for its habitual existence and worldview that has no place in the spiritual world. Many, having reached the threshold, are afraid of their own unadorned appearance, which is the guardian of the threshold, which does not let unprepared souls into the spiritual world, and many retreat, not having the courage to step over it. A person who has experienced such an experience at the very threshold of the spiritual world becomes convinced that it is a blessing for the ordinary human soul if it is not allowed to be unprepared for the threshold. This benefit is impossible to imagine otherwise as some higher power that protects a person from the dangers and horrors that await him at the threshold of the spiritual world and caused by his own disgusting appearance. Before the threshold of the spiritual world, there is a strict guard who vigilantly watches that an immature person does not penetrate through it. It is easier to bear all the doubts and ignorance of the spiritual world than the sight of that appearance, which must be thrown off in order to obtain the right to enter the spiritual world. In no case can a person be allowed real insight in spiritual areas until he has acquired the necessary abilities for this. Therefore, when entering the invisible world after death, if he is not yet ready to work in it, a veil is thrown over the phenomena of this world. He will see them only when he is quite ready for this. The lesser guardian of the threshold is an independent being that a person can perceive only at the appropriate stage of development. His appearance is terrible, and therefore it is necessary to have all the presence of mind and trust in his path in order to courageously meet him with his own appearance, which protects him from the premature entry into the spiritual world. The guardian of the threshold is the outstanding karma of a person, his moral balance, acting in the form of a sensually living being generated by the person himself. The meaning of the guardian is perceived by the student approximately in the following words. Until now, you were dominated by forces that remained invisible to you. Thanks to them, each of your good deeds has received its reward, and every bad act entailed had consequences. Thanks to their influence, your character was created from your life experience and thoughts. They determined your fate. They determined the measure of joy and suffering assigned to you in each of your incarnations, in accordance with your behavior in previous incarnations. They dominated you as a comprehensive law of karma. From now on, you yourself will carry out part of the work that they did upon you. Before you have suffered one or another heavy blow of fate, and you did not know why. It was a consequence of some harmful act in one of your previous lives. Have you met happiness and joy, which were also the consequence of previous actions? There are beautiful features in your character, but there are also ugly spots. Both are created by yourself, thanks to your previous experiences and thoughts. Until now, you didn't know them. Only the consequences were revealed to you. But the karmic forces have seen your previous actions, your innermost thoughts and feelings, and they use them to determine what you should be and live now. But now all the good and all the bad sides of your past lives should be revealed to you yourself. Until now, they were in you, but you couldn't see them. Now they come out of your personality and take on an independent image that you can see. And here I am myself. a being who has woven a body for myself out of my own noble and evil deeds. My ghostly image is woven from the pages of the account book of your own life. Until now you have carried me invisibly within yourself, and it was a blessing for you, because the wisdom of your hitherto hidden fate continued to work invisibly in you to extinguish the dark spots in your image. Now, when I have learned from you, this hidden wisdom has also departed from you and is transferring its work into your own hands. I must become perfect in myself, a beautiful being, or else perish. If the latter had happened, I would have dragged you down with me into the dark world. In order to prevent this, your own wisdom must now be so great as to take on the task of that hidden wisdom that has departed from you. After you cross my threshold, my visible image will not depart from you one step. And if in the future you do or think wrongly, you will immediately recognize your guilt by the disgusting demonic distortion of this image of me. Only when you correct all your past untruths and purify yourself so that further evil becomes completely impossible for you, then will my being turn into a radiant beauty. Then I will be able to connect with you again for the benefit of my future activities. My threshold is built from all the feelings of fear that you have, from all the fear of the possibility of taking responsibility for all your deeds and thoughts. As long as you still have some fear of self-management of your destiny, this threshold has not yet been completed in all its parts. And until you get at least one single stone in it, you will be forced to fatally stop in front of it or stumble over it. Do not try to cross this threshold until you feel completely free from fear and ready for the highest responsibility. Until now, I have come out of your own personality only when death has withdrawn you from your earthly life. But even then, my image remained closed to you. Only the forces of fate that ruled over you saw me and could, according to my appearance, develop your powers and abilities in the intervals between death and a new birth, so that in your new earthly life you could work on the beauty of your appearance for the benefit of your further development. And I myself was the one whose imperfections invariably forced the forces of fate to bring you to new incarnations on earth again and again. Because of me, the leaders of karma assigned to you a new birth, and only by unconsciously transforming me in this way, thanks to the renewed lives, into complete perfection, would you be freed from the lords of death and completely united with me. And in merging with me, he would have passed into immortality. Here I stand now before you, visible as I stood beside you, invisible in the hour of your death. Having crossed the threshold, you enter the realms that you previously entered after physical death. You will enter them with full consciousness, and from now on, while continuing to wander around the earth outwardly, you will at the same time wander in the kingdom of death, or, what is the same, in the kingdom of eternal life. Verily, I am also the angel of death, but at the same time I am the giver of an inexhaustible higher life. Thanks to me, you will die at the life of the body to survive the rebirth of an indestructible existence. The realm into which you are now entering will introduce you to beings of a supersensible order. But your first acquaintance in this world is destined to be myself, who is your own consciousness. I used to live my own life, but now you have awakened me to my own being, and I stand before you as a visible measure of your future actions, and as your own reproach. You were able to create me, but at the same time, you took on the responsibility to create me. End quote. The above appeal should be submitted not as something symbolic, but as a real experience of a spiritual disciple in the highest degree. The guard should warn him. The guard should warn him not to go further if he does not feel the strength to meet the requirements contained in this appeal. No matter how terrible the image of the guardian is, it is only the result of the student's past life, only his own character, awakened to an independent life outside of him. The training of the student should be aimed at enduring this spectacle without any fear, and at the moment of meeting, feeling his strength so increased that he can quite consciously take on the transformation of the guardian. The guardian of the threshold has expressed his demands, and a whirlwind rises in the place where he stood, which extinguishes all the spiritual lights that have hitherto illuminated the path of life. Complete darkness spreads out before the student, and out of the darkness comes a further exhortation. Do not cross my threshold until it becomes clear to you that from now on you will illuminate the darkness in front of you, and do not take a single step further until you have gained confidence that there is enough combustible substance in your own lamp. And only then does the guardian of the threshold pull back the veil that has hidden the deep secrets of life until now. So that's from The Solar Way. Isn't she wonderful? And that's the card again. Thank you for listening.